2024 was quite simply a great year for sequels. If you need receipts to believe it, look no further than these movies that dominated the box office.
Deadpool and Wolverine is the biggest Marvel hit in a minute, so why did this multiverse-spanning adventure strike such a nerve when others didn't? LFG. In its opening weekend, Deadpool and Wolverine shattered records. The film started out with a $38.5 million gross from preview screenings alone, breaking the record for an R-rated movie. That strong start was the precursor to an enormous opening weekend. The film took home $205 million at the domestic box office and an additional $233.3 million internationally, for a total opening weekend gross of $438.3 million. That's a new record for R-rated film openings, and it even makes it into the top 10 all-time for any film, landing at the number 8 spot. While it may have been hard to predict such a historic opening, all signs were pointing to Deadpool and Wolverine making a bold entrance. Media analyst Carrie Bible told Looper ahead of opening weekend, "This film has such great buzz and people love both Reynolds and Jackman. Tracking is high and fan enthusiasm is as well. Watch for this to have a huge opening." And that's exactly what happened.
Let's go!
Deadpool and Wolverine has generated more excitement than most other superhero movies have in years. A survey conducted among moviegoers by Fandango in December 2023 placed the threequel as the #1 most anticipated film of 2024, scoring ahead of Dune Part 2, Beetlejuice 2, and Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, to name just a few. A big part of that anticipation is the film's unique status within the MCU. It's officially part of the Marvel Studios franchise, but it's also a follow-up to the first 2 Deadpool movies, which were made prior to Disney's acquisition of 20th Century Fox. That quickly got fans of the old X-Men movies excited, as this is the closest we've gotten so far to the MCU introducing its own version of Marvel's mutants, aside from a version of Professor X appearing in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
I shall miss you, my friend.
In an era of the MCU many have described as lackluster or directionless, Deadpool and Wolverine is a clear, brash installment. Yes, it plays on nostalgia, but pulls from a deeper well than some of the other recent Marvel films. Hugh Jackman stated outright that 2017's Logan would be the end of him playing Wolverine. When the film came out, the Australian actor had been playing the part for the better part of 2 decades. Logan itself was marketed as his official send-off, and it wound up being the most critically acclaimed of all the X-Men movies.
I really thought I was done. Like, I was at peace with it.
While some would have preferred for the character to never return after such a fitting finale, it's hard to deny the box office appeal of such a beloved performance getting one more turn in the spotlight. Giving Jackman the comic-accurate yellow costume, something he never got in the Fox movies, was just icing on the cake. For many fans, seeing that R-rated, no-filter, bloody-clawed Wolverine one more time was a dream come true. Jackman still carries all his star power, and his chemistry with Ryan Reynolds makes for a great buddy movie dynamic. Analyst Carrie Bible told Looper, both Reynolds and Jackman have proven track records at the box office, and their combined star power here should make for a powerful combination. 2 of the movies that rank ahead of Logan on the top-grossing R-rated movies ever are Deadpool and Deadpool 2, which occupy the 3 and 4 spots behind Joker and Oppenheimer. Both films grossed over $780 million at the global box office, totaling more than $1.5 billion. The previous 2 Deadpool films also earned high critical praise, and of course the fans love them. The Deadpool films shook up the superhero genre, showing that an irreverent style aimed at older moviegoers can still lead to massive financial success. The fact that that legacy is separated from the recent MCU entries in people's minds may have aided Deadpool and Wolverine in the long run. Media analyst Carrie Bible said, "I would say the only challenge this film faces is superhero fatigue. Marvel was once invincible, but they've had several disappointments and even misfires at the box office. There is red-hot buzz, so this new film should easily turn things around." It surely helps that both the Deadpool franchise and Logan delivered very different tones than the usual comic book movie fare. That may be why the superhero fatigue phenomenon has left the latest MCU films seemingly unscathed. Shaking up the usual formula inevitably draws eyes. As Disney's foremost franchise, the MCU has always been kept under pretty strict guidelines to remain family-friendly. The franchise didn't drop its first F-bomb until Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 in 2023, despite the fact that PG-13 movies are usually allowed 1.
There's a button under the handle. Press that in.
Okay. Now what?
Open the door.
The films have also frequently been criticized as prudish, avoiding any semblance of sensuality in the larger interest of maintaining the Disney brand image. That rigidity has loosened here and there. The Netflix Marvel series were pretty violent, and the Disney Plus series Echo brought a more visceral feel into the mix. Even with those previous strides, though, the release of a full-on R-rated movie is absolutely the furthest that Marvel Studios has strayed from its kid-friendly roots. Risks in brand strategy often pay dividends, as Deadpool and Wolverine has shown. However, it's unlikely that this will dramatically shift the business model for the studio. Deadpool and Wolverine is rated R for a variety of reasons, most of which are uniquely relevant to the two title characters. However, if the film continues to blow the doors off, it's possible that Disney might continue to explore other projects for mature audiences going forward. Ever since Disney acquired 20th Century Fox, the X-Men have loomed on the horizon of the MCU. We've gotten bits and pieces, like Stewart's brief return as Professor X, and the X-Mansion in the mid-credit sequence of the Marvels. And of course, the immense popularity of X-Men '97 revitalized excitement for the Marvel's mutants. Deadpool and Wolverine fans those flames of X-Men nostalgia higher than ever, bringing back characters from the Fox films like Laura from Logan, aka X-23, and Pyro. X-Men villain Cassandra Nova also appears for the first time on the big screen. While it was unlikely that the movie was ever going to officially open a whole new X-Men series, getting all these big names associated with the mutants was enough to garner excitement among fans. A lot of Deadpool and Wolverine can be seen as a snarky but sincere celebration of that former franchise and the many actors who made it so successful. Fantastic Four is the next big comic addition to the MCU, but more mutants are coming eventually. Feige told Discussing Film on July 26th, "Our animated series X-Men '97 was sort of the first taste of people reuniting with the X-Men mythology and that storyline. The response to that series just further excited us about how to bring the soap opera and the saga of the mutants to the MCU." It was clear from the start what kind of movie Deadpool and Wolverine would be, overflowing with Easter eggs and cameos. Throwing Deadpool into a franchise as expansive as the MCU just gave him so many more walls to break.
I'm the Messiah. I am Marvel Jesus.
In addition to former X-Men actors reprising their old roles, Deadpool and Wolverine brings in tons of other once and future Marvel actors. Wesley Snipes plays Blade again, Chris Evans plays Johnny Storm again. Disney even brought Jennifer Garner back to play Elektra Nachos from the Daredevil and Elektra movies from the early 2000s. The cameos just keep coming. In addition to the familiar faces, Deadpool and Wolverine is packed with little pokes at the MCU itself. Hugh Jackman's starring role in the X-Men franchise is a key plot point, and the Void, where most of the movie takes place, is loaded with memorabilia from previous Marvel movies. Snipes told Entertainment Weekly of his return, "I did not think it was possible. I didn't think we would be able to pull it off. I didn't think that Marvel was into it. Disney was into it." Since 2013, Marvel Studios has put out multiple movies every year, with the exception of 2020, of course, when 0 MCU movies were released due to theater closures during the COVID-19 pandemic. At times, that rapid-fire release schedule has played to the franchise's benefit, building momentum in the lead-up to event-style crossover films. Ever since Avengers Endgame, though, the pace of MCU releases has felt more overwhelming than exciting. There hasn't been an Avengers movie since 2019, and the lack of unified narrative direction has created confusion for casual moviegoers. A lot of the films released over the last few years have been new one-offs, and the onrush of Disney Plus shows has only made things more complicated. Fewer movies doesn't necessarily mean better movies, but the fervor around Deadpool and Wolverine is hard to ignore. There are a lot of different reasons why the new movie is having so much success at the box office, but focus is surely one of them. Lots of people simply don't want there to be so many Marvel movies going to see them feels like homework. But if there's only one, well, that's a much easier sell. On-screen chemistry is great, but in this era of viral marketing campaigns and celebrity Instagram feeds, a little off-screen chemistry doesn't hurt either. Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman have been friends for years, and they've often made that friendship public via various promotional campaigns and other projects. In the case of Deadpool and Wolverine, it especially adds to the story that the two actors first met on the set of X-Men Origins Wolverine. Reynolds told People of being on that set, "Honestly, it left the biggest impression on me. I thought, man, if I'm ever even remotely lucky enough to be in Hugh Jackman's position in life, these are the lessons you want to get into your DNA as soon as humanly possible." Since then, they've kept up a playful banter online, jabbing at one another in interviews and appearing in commercials for each other's business ventures.
Ryan and I recently called it a truce in our social media war, and we promised to make ads for each other.
Yeah, we sure did.
Some might see this kind of public celebrity friendship as a simple PR maneuver, but it's clear that the two men are genuinely good friends. The ribbing relationship that they've played up over the last decade has translated well to the Deadpool and Wolverine press tour, generating additional buzz off of the stars' long-standing real-life dynamic. Plus, for longtime fans, it's just fun to see their two X-Men characters get a redemption arc after their 2009 blunder. Of all the Disney Plus shows that Marvel Studios has put out over the last few years, Loki ranks highly. It was the most watched MCU series on the streaming platform as of June 2023, according to Statista, and it's regularly ranked right alongside WandaVision as the franchise's best Disney Plus showing. The fact that Loki remains the only MCU Disney series to get a second season is another testament to its success. With its timeline-fixing focus, Loki is about as central of a story to connect to as the MCU has. It introduced much of the timeline lore that has driven the so-called multiverse saga, and it's that lore that Deadpool and Wolverine plays on most of all.
Your little cinematic universe is about to change forever.
For all the praise they received, fewer casual moviegoers are likely to be familiar with the ins and outs of Hawkeye or the Moon Knight series. But since Loki has been so successful, Deadpool 3 is able to lean on it in a way that audiences understand. The Void, the TVA, Alioth, the Sacred Timeline, multiverse variants, all of these ideas started in Loki, and they drive the plot of Deadpool and Wolverine as well. It's about as much cohesion as a movie has had with a show in the MCU of late, and it's likely played a role in the massive crowds that are turning out for Deadpool 3. The success of Deadpool and Wolverine is great news for the MCU, but it won't be so easy to translate to the rest of the MCU. For one, this is theoretically the end of a trilogy, even if Deadpool does pop back up in future projects. Even if he does, though, this isn't a central story to the franchise, nor is it a major pillar of the current saga. If anything, it's a comedic side story. Its success calls to mind Marvel's last big hit, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which also didn't have much to offer the larger franchise. The one big potential impact of Deadpool and Wolverine doing so well is Disney greenlighting more R-rated Marvel projects. Disney CEO Bob Iger has already said that the company will continue exploring that kind of content at Marvel Studios, both with Deadpool and other characters. There's certainly a lot of rich material to pull from more adult-oriented comic stories. With the recent news that Robert Downey Jr. will be returning to the MCU to play Doctor Doom in 2026's Avengers Doomsday, the series seems to be recentering around the Fantastic Four, at least for now. Thunderbolts and Captain America Brave New World are also on the way in 2025. It remains to be seen then if the studio can keep up the box office momentum after Deadpool and Wolverine.
How did a 3-hour movie about worms and spice make serious cash in its opening weekend? It probably has something to do with the all-star cast, and the fact that we've been waiting for it for 2.5 years. This is how Dune Part 2 managed to dominate the box office over a single weekend. It's a sequel world and we just live in it. Whenever a movie does well, the first thing executives consider is whether or not they can milk it for another installment, even if continuing the story doesn't actually make any sense.
This is only the beginning.
Dune is a little different though, since the 2021 film only adapts the first half of Frank Herbert's epic novel. Director Denis Villeneuve always intended on producing another one. Thankfully, a worldwide box office of more than $430 million was enough to get Warner Brothers to greenlight the sequel without scrapping it and using it as a tax write-off. It's a good thing they did too. In just its opening weekend, per Deadline, Dune Part 2 grossed a pretty hefty sum of $81.5 million domestically.
Wow, that's a lot of money. Where do you keep it all?
Considering that Dune Part 1 technically tells an incomplete story, it makes sense that lots of fans of the first film have come out to see the second half of the narrative play out on the biggest possible screen. Even some viewers who didn't like Part 1 that much bought tickets and hoped that the sequel would finally tie everything together. Simply put, Dune Part 2's status as a blockbuster sequel is enough on its own to get plenty of butts into seats. Thankfully though, it seems to be closer in quality to Top Gun Maverick than Speed 2 Cruise Control. The planet Arrakis has always been full of familiar faces. David Lynch's Dune was a star-studded affair, as was Alejandro Jodorowsky's vision of an adaptation that never materialized. Denis Villeneuve's Dune may not feature Patrick Stewart or Orson Welles, but it still boasts a cast that any director would be lucky to work with. In the lead role of Paul Atreides, of course, is Call Me By Your Name actor and former video game YouTuber Timothée Chalamet, and he's not alone. He's backed by an all-star cast that includes the likes of Josh Brolin, Zendaya, Stellan Skarsgård, Rebecca Ferguson, Dave Bautista, and Javier Bardem. Unfortunately for fans of conventionally attractive men, Oscar Isaac and Jason Momoa don't return in the sequel. But if you're into freaky-looking bald guys, Austin Butler's Fade Rather should definitely hit the spot. Also joining the cast are Florence Pugh as Princess Uralan, Léa Seydoux as Lady Margot, and Christopher Walken as Emperor Shaddam IV. Dune without the Fremen would be like Avatar without the Na'vi, or the other Avatar without the air nomads. They're the indigenous people forced to take up arms when invaders come to claim their land. Needless to say, they're a pretty important element of life on Arrakis.
I'm Fremen. The desert's my home.
Part 1 didn't give them as much screen time as some fans of Frank Herbert's novel had hoped. That's not Denis Villeneuve's fault though, it's just how the book is structured. The end of Dune Part 1 teases a larger role for the Fremen in Part 2, and thankfully it doesn't disappoint in that department. More of the Fremen means more of Zendaya as Chani and Javier Bardem as Stilgar. And with Paul becoming one of them, you better get used to seeing plenty of bright blue eyes. Whether you're interested in their unique customs or the relationship between Chani and Paul, the presence of the Fremen is a pretty big draw for Dune Part 2. But let's be honest, we're really here for the worms.
We're about to enter worm territory.
The deserts of Arrakis would be pretty boring if they were anything like the deserts of Earth. But in Dune, there are dangerous secrets lurking beneath the surface.
Worms.
The sandworms of Dune, or Shai Hulud as they're also known, grow to colossal size, play an important role in Fremen culture, and inspired an ill-conceived popcorn bucket available now at your local theater.
And I'm not scared of the teeth in the middle.
When they're not filled with snacks, the sandworms of Arrakis are busy protecting their territory, racing around, eating trespassers with their razor-sharp butthole mouths. At least that's what it was when they showed up in Dune Part 1. Things are different for Part 2. Like the T-800 in Terminator, the sandworms change from terrifying monsters into powerful protectors. In Herbert's novels, the Fremen practice the art of catching and riding sandworms, and now that Paul has joined their ranks, he's getting in on the fun. The promise of even more worms doing even more cool things definitely persuaded more than a few people into buying a ticket on opening weekend. The first book in the Dune series ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, but Villeneuve's Dune Part 1 runs into an even more frustrating conclusion. The movie spends 2.5 hours building up the story, only to have everything come crashing down for Paul and the rest of his family and friends. The Harkonnens reinvade, the family patriarch Leto is killed, and Paul and his mother Jessica find themselves in exile in the hostile desert. They narrowly survive a sandstorm and a sandworm encounter before running right into Stilgar and his Fremen warriors, including Chani. Paul also makes his first kill by dispatching the militant Jamis in ritual combat. After that, the group heads off to find shelter, and that's it. Paul's life is in shambles, his father is dead, his inheritance is lost, and the movie is over. There's not much in the way of closure at all. So naturally, plenty of fans couldn't wait a single day longer once Dune Part 2 opened.
You wait till you see it. It's beautiful out there.
Dune Part 1 released in October of 2021, which wasn't the best time for the movie theater business. It had been a year and a half since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, and lots of people still weren't quite comfortable with the idea of sitting in a crowded cinema for 2.5 hours. When Warner Brothers announced that Dune would be coming to what was then known as HBO Max at the same time as a theatrical release, staying home became a no-brainer for anyone with a subscription, or more likely a password they could borrow from someone. This divided experience meant that streaming audiences were cannibalizing theatrical revenue in real time, and it led to relatively muted box office numbers that totaled under $500 million globally when all was said and done. For all of the fans who were forced to watch the first film at home, Dune Part 2 was a chance at theatrical redemption, and they seized the opportunity to see the movie at the cinema at the first possible opportunity. Any Dune adaptation has the luxury of coming with a built-in audience, considering that the original book has sold over 20 million copies since it was written in the mid-1960s. It's even been translated into over 20 languages, making it one of the most iconic sci-fi stories of the 20th century. The original book was the first of 6 primary Dune novels, which served as a core that spawned over 24 total books set in the Dune universe. Some are definitely better than others. Dune has long been considered by some critics to be unadaptable, but Villeneuve wasn't the first to try and prove them wrong. David Lynch infamously gave it a shot in the 1980s with Kyle MacLachlan as Paul, but received mostly poor reviews. Alejandro Jodorowsky also tried to bring his bizarre vision of the novel to life, but he failed so hard they made a documentary about it. William Hurt even starred in a forgotten Dune miniseries that was released around the turn of the century. Plenty of fans would agree that none of these projects properly channeled Frank Herbert's novel, until the recent take proved the naysayers wrong. If you're a longtime Dune fan, that's definitely something to smile about.
Smile, Gurney. I am smiling.
Dune Part 1 is a gorgeous movie, so you might be surprised to learn that only about 40% of it was filmed on IMAX cameras. Dune Part 2 went all in, 100% filmed for IMAX. Obviously, that's a big incentive for cinephiles to get the best viewing experience by, well, seeing it in IMAX. You don't eat filet mignon on a paper plate, and you don't watch IMAX at 2.35 to 1, the peasant's aspect ratio as it's known. And its marketing totally hyped up the experience.
If you want to see the full power of Dune, you should see it in IMAX.
The point I'm getting to is that IMAX tickets cost more. Box office numbers don't tally tickets sold. They count cash in the bank. That massive influx of IMAX receipts means more cha-ching to spice up the weekend box office totals. IMAX or not, people were still going to see this movie. But the inflated IMAX prices were just a bonus for an already impressive haul.
Can you imagine the wealth?
It's human nature. The more you can't have something, the more you want it. Like the stickers I can't have until I finish making this video. I want my Snickers. Dune Part 2 was initially supposed to be released in October 2023, 2 years after the first movie. Of course, that initial release window was set before 2023 became known as the year people in Hollywood wanted fair payment. So it got pushed back to November 2023 and then again to March 2024. After such an enticing first installment, the delay was maddening for fans who were desperate to see the story come to a conclusion, especially after the way it ended. Can I mention that again? You know, Paul and the Fremen marching off across the desert, destiny just over the horizon, adventures lying in wait, and then… Welp, see you in a few years. Pretty frustrating, right? And the more it got delayed, the more fans were chomping at the bit to see what Paul and his friends were getting up to. Whether or not you want to admit it, Dune Part 1 is pretty slow. It spends most of its time introducing characters and the planet of Arrakis, and it can be pretty dry, pun intended. At the very least, the hypnotic desert landscapes and ambient soundtrack of the film's first half are probably great for falling asleep to at night.
Sand and more sand. So much sand, you really wouldn't believe it.
It's only during the second half of the movie that the action gets going, when the Harkonnens launch a genocidal war against the House of Atreides. Until then, the action is mainly just a sparring match and a bunch of cool ramps getting lowered. When you sum it all up, there really isn't that much going on, especially compared to the second half of the book. Accordingly, most of the story's biggest action sequences were reserved for the second film. That's right, Dune Part 2 is even Duner. The sequel has more adventure, higher stakes, and of course, sandworms. Lots of sandworms. It rolled into theaters like… I got worms! Basically, audiences knew they were in for an action-packed treat heading into opening weekend, and the box office numbers prove it. Finally, Dune Part 2 hit theaters in the perfect climate. That's not a metaphor. The weather was literally a benefit. By the end of February, everyone was tired of being cooped up for winter and getting pissed at their families. Getting out for a movie was a no-brainer, and Dune was waiting with wide open arms and wider open deserts. It didn't hurt either that there was pretty much no competition. What's the alternative? Watching Madame Web a third time? No. For moviegoers looking for a diversion, Dune Part 2 was really the only choice. This made the timing of the Dune sequel's release a key part of its initial momentum, which translates to big box office bucks. Now that's what I call
desert power.
Glowing reviews, a talented cast of young actors, and a final act that people can't stop talking about. These are just a few of the reasons why Alien Romulus put up such huge box office numbers. Alien Romulus put up surprisingly robust numbers in its opening weekend. The film pulled in around $108 million worldwide in just a few days, with $42 million of that coming from the domestic box office. That's good for the second best domestic opening weekend in the franchise's history. The success of Romulus also owes some thanks to China, where it overperformed with an astonishing $25.7 million in that country alone. That makes it the second biggest opener in China in 2024, right behind Deadpool and Wolverine. All of this proves there's still heavy interest in the Alien franchise. Romulus represents an improvement over the previous entry, Alien Covenant. which made $36.1 million in its opening frame. Numerous explanations exist for why Romulus struck a chord at this point in time, setting the stage for more Alien movies. More so than other franchises, Alien movies tend to take their sweet time. Each feature-length installment usually takes 5 to 7 years to hit the big screen. Following 1997's Alien Resurrection, the Xenomorphs were tied up in the crossover films Alien vs. Predator and Aliens vs. Predator: Requiem. The series came back with Ridley Scott taking the reins again for 2012's Prometheus, and Scott returned for 2017's Alien Covenant. However, Covenant was largely seen as an underperformer, particularly in the wake of Prometheus.
Hey, baby.
You're strong.
Covenant ended its run with $240 million worldwide, whereas Prometheus brought in over $400 million 5 years prior. Covenant was supposed to receive a follow-up in the form of Alien Awakening, but that film didn't happen and seemingly got shelved in favor of a back-to-basics approach with Alien Romulus. 2019 saw the release of a few Alien short films to commemorate the franchise's 40th anniversary, as well as an Alien Isolation web series. However, it's been a while since an Alien flick was available in theaters. With Covenant somewhat overlooked upon release, people may have been primed for a good old-fashioned Alien movie to get them invested in the series once more. The last two Alien movies, Prometheus and Alien Covenant, saw Scott clearly trying to take the franchise in a new direction. Prometheus is largely absent of xenomorphs, while both films involve more philosophical discussions about humanity's place in the universe and explore the concept of how humankind's creators could end up hating us.
What do you believe in, David?
Creation.
Ideas concerning original sin and hubris run rampant, and while there are still alien attacks and body horror, they often take a back seat to these larger ideas Scott wants to explore. These departures resulted in mixed receptions for both movies. In particular, Alien Covenant holds a 65% positive rating from critics on Rotten Tomatoes. General audiences were even more critical, giving the film a score of 55%. In contrast, Alien Romulus takes the franchise back to its roots. The plot largely resembles that of the original Alien, with a group of people trapped on a space station with xenomorphs and facehuggers running amok. Alien Romulus has ample Easter eggs and small details to dig into, as characters literally just quote previous Alien movies. However, there's no denying the results, with audiences responding to an Alien movie that knows it's an Alien movie.
This place gives me the creeps.
Mixed reviews may have kept people away from Alien Covenant, but the Rotten Tomatoes reviews for Alien Romulus were largely positive. Many appear to think the movie's a fun ride that's everything one could want out of another Alien entry, with The Atlantic writing in its review, Alien Romulus really shines when it plays like a straightforward Alien movie and doesn't pander to the demands of franchisable intellectual property. Interestingly, while some critics praised Romulus for getting back to the roots of the franchise, some reviews criticized the film for being too reliant on the past. The Washington Post issued a mostly positive review, while still asserting, "It's a no-frills, straight-up genre piece built largely on the bones of the first two movies. All that's missing are originality and a convincing final act." While many people thought Covenant deviated too much from what had come before, some critics are now saying Romulus is almost too familiar. You can't please everyone, but these reviews and others likely convinced audiences that Romulus would give them precisely what they wanted out of an Alien flick, and sometimes that's all you need. While Alien Covenant opened 2 weeks after Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 back in 2017, Alien Romulus opened 3 weeks after a different Marvel movie, Deadpool and Wolverine, but fared much better. It's possible that the extra week was enough of a buffer for audiences, plus there really hasn't been anything that could compromise people's excitement over an Alien movie. It Ends With Us targeted a very different crowd, while Borderlands, coming out a week before on August 9th, utterly bombed at the box office. It's also been a solid summer for horror films and thrillers. Longlegs exceeded expectations earlier in July, taking in over $100 million globally against a budget of just $10 million. While the summer got off on a rocky footing with The Fall Guy and Furiosa: A Mad Max Saga stumbling financially, audiences have been more receptive to seeing movies in theaters lately. While there were concerns that audiences were no longer interested in going to theaters in the advent of streaming, films like Romulus prove otherwise. When someone walks into an alien movie, they can be pretty certain there will be ample kills courtesy of xenomorphs. Alien Romulus definitely fulfills that promise, featuring kills utilizing acid blood and a xenomorph bursting out of someone's chest. While all of that is largely what fans have seen before from this franchise, Romulus veers off into ridiculously amazing territory in its final act that had people talking, and may have enticed others to check out the film. The ending of Alien Romulus sees Kay inject herself with the black compound, later giving birth to a rapidly evolving entity known as the Offspring. One could say this bears similarities to the newborn from Alien Resurrection, but its aesthetic is far more grotesque. Its facial movements are far more advanced than what we got with the newborn, even smiling at one point, which is enough to send shivers down the spine. While many praised Romulus online, this final act reveal really got people worked up, such as one ex-user who wrote, "The last 10 to 15 minutes of this movie features some of the most insane stuff I've seen in a movie ever." This kind of word of mouth is perfect for any horror film.
What the hell is this?
I don't know.
The xenomorphs may be the main attraction of an alien movie, but there's no denying that Romulus also boasts a talented young cast. While previous installments have focused on space truckers and Marines, Romulus sees a group of young people trying to avoid working for Weyland-Yutani for the rest of their lives, which brings them to the Renaissance space station. Some rising talent exists within these ranks, all of whom have bright futures ahead of them. The cast is led by Rain, played by Kaylee Spaney, who made waves earlier in 2024 with Civil War, and jumped on many people's radars with the lead role in 2023's Priscilla. David Johnson has earned a great deal of praise for portraying the synthetic human Andy, who veers between brotherly care and cunning manipulation. Meanwhile, Isabella Merced has numerous credits to her name already, and she's poised for bigger breakouts next year with The Last of Us Season 2 and James Gunn's Superman. Having young actors with growing fan bases in the cast, it's possible that people who wouldn't otherwise be interested in an alien movie may have checked it out just for them. One might assume a film in a long-running franchise can get by on name value alone. However, Alien Romulus proves that investing in a solid marketing strategy can bring dividends even for an existing IP. First and foremost, the Romulus trailers all had fans saying the same thing about how frightening the facehuggers were. The trailers also drew parallels to the original Alien and featured expert sound design that made the pre-chest-bursting sequence hit so much harder. Alien Romulus followed in the footsteps of other 2024 movies like Dune Part 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine by having its own custom popcorn bucket. The marketing also entered the real world with a viral stunt where people were lying motionless around Times Square with facehuggers attached to them. Plenty of folks took videos and photos, adding to the awareness and interest surrounding the movie. Name recognition is no longer enough to sell a movie. Even Marvel movies are no longer guaranteed hits, as evidenced by The Marvels bombing last year. The trailer showed off how utterly terrifying Alien Romulus would be, while real-world stunts got people talking even more. The campaign as a whole was a masterclass in raising awareness for a recognizable property, so it shouldn't be surprising that people's curiosity drew them to theaters on opening weekend. Going on Letterboxd, or X, following the opening of Alien Romulus is a treat just to see people's rankings for the franchise. While Alien and Aliens often get the top spots, some people have more eclectic tastes, asserting that Prometheus or even Alien 3 is the best.
The only question is, what are you gonna do about it?
The truth is, the Alien franchise has taken many big chances over the decades, with each installment doing something a little different from what's come before. Alien Romulus is essentially a greatest hit of the franchise, offering a little something for everyone who's been invested in the series. At its core, the premise of any Alien movie is straightforward. Trap a bunch of people with a killer xenomorph on the loose. Simultaneously, there's also a rich mythology that can be expanded upon. allowing for the exploration of numerous themes, from humankind confronting its creators to corporations taking often fatal advantage of its workers. It allows the franchise to evolve in new directions, with Alien Earth, a new TV series from Noah Hawley, coming to FX in 2025.
It's tempting to call Godzilla Kong: The New Empire a surprise hit, but it's really only a surprise if you haven't been paying attention. Here's why the Monster Mash crushed the box office. In its opening weekend, Godzilla Kong eviscerated its modest $50 million studio projections to bring in $80 million at the domestic box office. This is far and away the best opening weekend for a MonsterVerse film since 2014's Godzilla. By 2024 standards, it's topped every single opening weekend so far except for Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2, which made $82 million in its first weekend. If you count Easter Monday, though, Godzilla Kong trounced even Dune, claiming the crown with $87.7 million. Godzilla Kong also stomped all over the fleeting box office king Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, racing right past its total domestic haul. Globally, Godzilla Kong made just over $202 million in its first week. While this number isn't necessarily something to roar at given its $135 million budget, it's obvious the film's success isn't being carried solely by overseas markets. Though Godzilla is a Japanese import, there's clearly still a massive appetite for kaiju stories in America as well. Discount DVD bins are littered with failed cinematic universes that attempted to follow in the footsteps of the MCU, and it's all too easy to overlook that the MonsterVerse is arguably the most successful to steal this storytelling strategy. The DCEU, for example, got stuck in a place where people mainly compared it to Marvel's successes, both critically and commercially. Though the MonsterVerse has yet to reach the same peaks as either Marvel or DC, it has managed to maintain and slowly grow a universe with a sound continuity and relatively consistent characters and aesthetic. All of this is to say that Godzilla Kong had the unique benefit to being part of a larger franchise, as well as being able to confidently offer audiences a story that would uphold the integrity of what has been produced in the MonsterVerse thus far. This franchise as a whole projects confidence and clarity, and that's pretty refreshing among today's cinematic universes.
That's not just a signal. That's a call for war.
Of course, for anything to be a true cinematic universe these days, it has to include a slightly unnecessary prestige streaming series that simultaneously claims to be vital to the overarching narrative while also being deliberately ignorable. And even though the Apple TV Plus MonsterVerse series Monarch: Legacy of Monsters is both of those things, it happens to be pretty darn good. So good, it has the highest Rotten Tomatoes score of anything the franchise has produced to date. It's hard to say whether or not it would have hurt Godzilla Kong if Monarch had been panned by critics and viewers. As a consequence of its warm reception, however, the MonsterVerse got a solid 2 months of favorable press through mid-January, just a month before Warner Bros. And Legendary would kick off the marketing push for Godzilla Kong in earnest with a second trailer. So what if Monarch isn't vital to the overarching narrative of the series, and who cares if it adds more than a few wrinkles to the MonsterVerse timeline? At the very least, it helped create the momentum needed for Godzilla Kong to succeed to the extent that it did.
Here's our ride.
Come on, let's go.
Warner Bros. Ruffled more than a few feathers when it made the controversial decision to release its 2021 slate of films on the streaming service now known as Max. There were valid concerns about how the movie might undermine the struggling theater industry and compromise the creative visions of those who made these movies possible in the first place. Yet, although Godzilla vs. Kong was made available on the streamer for all subscribers at no additional cost, the film still managed to generate an impressive $48.5 million in its first 5 days in theaters, a pandemic record according to Variety. Now, it seems clear that this pandemic-defying performance provided the MonsterVerse specifically with at least one unique benefit. Audiences were still up to date on the series. Plenty of franchise films managed to debut during the pandemic with similar or identical release strategies, but failed to make the same impact as Godzilla vs. Kong. In Godzilla Kong's case, it seems as though the fan base was as active as ever during the pandemic. Perhaps even more so, given they started a grassroots Twitter campaign to urge the studios to make another film. The hashtag #ContinueTheMonsterVerse began trending in April 2021, and even Legendary Pictures tweeted about it. It's probably at least a little due to the fan campaign that Godzilla and Kong got to reunite. What about those who didn't keep up with the MonsterVerse during the pandemic? Not all audiences are attached to Godzilla as a character, but there's a chance that some people were converted by the 2023 sleeper hit Godzilla Minus One. Aside from blowing everyone away at the box office and surpassing Bong Joon-ho's Parasites as the third highest grossing non-English film in America, it also targeted a slightly different moviegoing audience than the MonsterVerse films. While the MonsterVerse has the aesthetics, tone, and scale of a typical American blockbuster, Godzilla Minus One is quieter and starkly pensive. In other words, it's not the sort of movie for those who just want to see a giant monster cause unimaginable havoc, though it does have plenty of that to offer. As such, it stands to reason that some audiences who had no interest in kaiju flicks but took a chance on Godzilla Minus One because of the positive word of mouth might have left the theater understanding why people love these films. You don't need to see every Godzilla film in order to see Godzilla Kong, but the award-winning Godzilla Minus One might have allowed some people to connect with Godzilla who had never seen a kaiju film before. Subsequently, these newly converted fans may have decided to take a chance on Godzilla Kong as well, particularly as ads for the new American film often played before the subtitled Japanese one. With endless casting announcements and overstuffed trailers, it often feels like big-budget movies don't have any surprise reveals to offer anymore. On the other hand, the films in the MonsterVerse largely choose to play their cards closer to the chest than their competitors, even keeping iconic villains under wrap as much as possible. The first trailers of the 2014 Godzilla were memorable for how little they showed of the titular monster, instead focusing on the haunting reactions from bystanders and the harrowing consequences of his power. They also didn't reveal the film's secondary antagonist, a strategy the distributor employed again to even greater effect for Godzilla vs. Kong. Ticket buyers familiar with the series were likely excited to see if there were any similar reveals in store in Godzilla Kong. That expectation also likely influenced many fans' decision to see the movie in the first weekend, to avoid having any surprises spoiled for them. Trailers have a major impact on a film's immediate commercial viability, and a studio can't expect numbers like Godzilla Kong unless it has the marketing to back it up, which is precisely what Godzilla Kong had. From sweeping location shots that show off the film's visual tone and scale to the haunting music, the first trailer for Godzilla Kong perfectly captures the energy that fans watch these films to experience. Dread, majesty, triumph, it's all there. These early trailers also maintained a sense of mystery by teasing plot points and characters rather than explaining or showing them outright. Again, in an age where it's all too common that audiences know virtually everything about a major studio release before going into the theater, it's genuinely inspiring to see Warner Bros. And Legendary Entertainment take a more subtle approach with two of the least subtle characters in cinema. Up until this point, one of the major drawbacks of the MonsterVerse films, particularly those featuring Godzilla, was the dark, hazy visual style. From posters to trailers to entire scenes in the final cut of the films, the most common image one would conjure up from these movies is the vague shape of Godzilla, bathed in mottled light and almost entirely obscured by clouds, smoke, or fog. This style may have been effective back in 2014, but after 3 movies with this character, audiences are probably getting a bit bored of the same visual tropes being used over and over again. It seems the creative team was thinking along the same lines, as the vibrant visual palettes of Kong's Skull Island and the splashes of color used sparingly in Godzilla vs. Kong have now been allowed to spread throughout Godzilla Kong. Both the trailers and the posters stood out as strikingly vibrant compared to those used for previous Godzilla installments. This apparent desire for color might even explain some of the film's redesigns, like why Godzilla is now pink, or why Kong has a bright yellow gauntlet, or why Godzilla is now pink.
We've made some minor augmentations.
Oh. With this new liberal use of daylight and bright colors, Godzilla and Kong feel rejuvenated from a visual perspective. It almost seems as though this represents the studio asserting both characters as blockbuster heroes rather than opaque figures of destruction, which, if you ignore the obvious thematic drawbacks of doing that, is a decent way to breathe new life into the franchise. We're 10 years into the MonsterVerse at this point, and none of the films in the franchise have managed to crack a score of 80% on Rotten Tomatoes. Godzilla Kong specifically was revealed to have a lower score of 62% ahead of its official release, before quickly falling to a rotten score in the 50s over the course of its opening weekend. For any other film, this lukewarm reception might have dampened audience excitement and negatively influenced some viewers' decision to buy tickets. But Godzilla Kong isn't any other film. At this point, fans of the MonsterVerse aren't expecting critical acclaim before a release. These are CGI-reliant spectacles that will score in the high 70s on a good day and deliver exactly what fans hope to see. From the fans' perspective, it doesn't matter if seasoned movie critics assess that the narrative doesn't hold up or that the human characters fall flat. These movies aren't really meant to be showcases of drama. Perhaps this franchise will find the limits of its audience's appetite for unbalanced action. Until then, as long as the MonsterVerse promises fans the go-for-broke spectacle they expect, poor reviews are unlikely to affect its definitive box office dominance.
October has delivered Art the Clown, a Christmas miracle. So how did an indie underdog slaughter a major DC Comics sequel at the box office? We reached out to our expert, Ryan Scott of Slash Film, to learn more. The original Terrifier has only grossed a few $100,000 since its debut in 2016, even accounting for its multiple re-releases. Terrifier 2, on the other hand, cemented the series' future viability with an $800,000 opening and a total worldwide haul of $15 million. Given that Terrifier 3 has already passed the total worldwide gross of its predecessor in the US alone, it's safe to say Art the Clown's reign is only getting started. According to Ryan Scott, Terrifier has become a true known commodity in the horror world over the last 2 years. Terrifier 2 was one of the most shocking success stories of 2022, financially speaking. Both the film's content and its underdog success story have grown the series' cult following, and even helped push it toward the mainstream. Scott points out, Art the Clown is everywhere now. Even people who don't watch these movies have seen him. Some analysts may have underestimated Terrifier 3, given its lack of conventional star power, but Art the Clown's growing prominence as a horror and Halloween icon has made him a recognizable and apparently bankable leading man.
By dressing like Santa Claus, silent psycho killer Art the Clown adds a new flavor to his immaculate brand of slasher mutilation.
For a film in this specific subgenre, this is arguably more important than attaching a big name to the marquee. Scott notes that, when it comes to horror, particularly slashers, the villain can be the star. In the case of the Terrifier franchise, Art the Clown has become the star. People want to see what he's going to do next, even if it's something maybe they wish they hadn't seen. That's the magic sauce here. Box office expectations for Terrifier 3 weren't crazy high with Joker 2 opening just a week before, but sometimes things fall into place, as Scott explained. With Joker, Folie à Deux opening a week earlier and straight-up bombing, Terrifier 3 ended up in a power position. It's just purely circumstantial, and for the filmmakers, downright serendipitous. Nobody could have predicted this.
Do you still think you're a star?
According to box office analytics company Post-Track, 52% of those that saw the threequel instead of Joker did so because they like horror. The Joker sequel awkwardly straddled the line between horror thriller, musical, and superhero flick, failing to capture the magic of any genre even in its marketing.
I got the sneaking suspicion that we're not giving the people what they want.
Terrifier 3, on the other hand, is out there and unapologetic about its identity. The brand is blood. And then there are the reviews. Terrifier 3 has been warmly received by critics and audiences alike. The film maintains the narrative quality of the previous installment, but let's not kid ourselves. Terrifier fans are less interested in the film's dramatic merits and more interested in how gross, gory, and scary it is.
Who's this Santa? He's scaring my kid.
In a glowing 4 out of 5-star review for The Guardian, Catherine Bray wrote, "The number of horror films that promise to sicken your soul and shrivel your stomach is enormous, but the proportion that actually do so, particularly for veteran horror watchers, is small. I'm pleased to report that Terrifier 3 is genuinely gruesome." That's a ringing endorsement for Terrifier fans, and Kim Newman of Empire doubled down, although it was more of a warning, writing, "Managing to go further over the top and pushing more offense buttons than you think possible. Terrifier 3 is recommended only for the strong of stomach and hard of heart." In our own mixed review of the film, Looper hailed it as the biggest, grossest art attack yet. Costing only $2 million to produce, Terrifier 3 has certainly managed to make back the entirety of what was invested into its production, and is likely generating favorable dividends for anyone smart enough to take a financial stake in it. Add to that the efficiency with which Terrifier 3 managed to find and attract its target audience. Even with 1/100th of the Joker 2 marketing budget at its disposal, the film didn't buy any national ads, and instead focused on a social media-driven campaign, the likes of which have elevated such lower-budget features as Godzilla Minus One. And for real fans, Terrifier 3 cleverly partnered with Venmo to set up an Art the Clown hotline, which would creepily trigger Art to send callers a penny via the app. The stunt worked, leading to TikTok and social posts about users' experiences calling the number for themselves. Low cost, high return. Let's face it, few of us are brave enough to watch Art rampage on our own, and why would we want to?
We both know this isn't over.
Apparently, a lot of young moviegoers felt the same way, according to Post-Track. 49% of audience members under the age of 25 showed up with at least one other person. A third were there as a part of a group of 3 or more. And more than half of moviegoers surveyed by PostTrack said they'd encourage their friends to see the film in theaters rather than wait for it on streaming. Clearly, in the angry clown war of 2024, Art the Clown has emerged the people's champion as he and director Damien Leone stare down the blood-soaked path to Terrifier 4. They can take heart that their lucky streak has yet to run out, thanks in large part to shrewd spending, chilling characters, and, most of all, the fans that have supported this franchise every step of the way.
Given the mixed results legacy sequels have gotten, Beetlejuice easily could have been relegated to box office purgatory. Luckily, it totally possessed the box office during its opening weekend, and for good reason. Beetlejuice took in $110 million domestically in its opening weekend, with an extra $35 million from overseas, bringing its total global gross so far to $145 million. The horror comedy sequel got off to a spectacular start in Wednesday and Thursday night previews, bringing in $12 million before it even officially came out on Friday. Those preview numbers put it on par with Dune Part 2. As it stands, Beetlejuice now has the second highest domestic opening weekend of any film ever released in September, topped only by 2017's It at $123 million. Funny enough, the previous second-place finish was held by another sequel, It Chapter 2, which earned $91 million during its opening frame in September 2019. After 36 years, the original Beetlejuice still holds up on a rewatch. Gen Xers can appreciate the darker elements of the movie, while still enjoying the film's most hilarious moments. Millennials may have been a bit younger when they were introduced to this goofy depiction of the afterlife, which may very well have informed the generation's largely darker sense of humor. Plus, depending on how old you were when you first saw it, frightening images like Adam and Barbara stretching out their faces to try and scare the deets may have scarred you for life. The original film is also a product of its time. For instance, Beetlejuice isn't the most appropriate demon around.
Am I overstepped my bounds? Just tell me, come on.
That also applies to the visual effects, which occasionally show their age. But stop-motion animation is always going to be a welcome sight to see in any movie. And the costumes and makeup make for a colorful and vibrant afterlife. Then there's the influence of Tim Burton. His filmography, particularly his earlier work, has made an impact on countless viewers and filmmakers. Movies like Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, and The Nightmare Before Christmas helped to reimagine the fields of horror, fantasy, and animation. In turn, his interpretation of Batman redefined the character, the superhero genre, and the definition of a Hollywood blockbuster. Nearly 4 decades later, Beetlejuice remains the signature film of the Tim Burton brand. It makes sense that anyone who grew up with the 1988 movie Beetlejuice would turn out to see the sequel on its opening weekend. However, Beetlejuice might have also grossed so much money thanks in part to Gen Z coming out. Curiously, it seems many Gen Zers love the pinstripe suit-wearing demon thanks to Beetlejuice the musical. The show opened on Broadway in 2019, and despite negative reviews from some prominent critics, it ended up being a huge smash. This was likely driven by an onslaught of younger theatergoers, with the Los Angeles Times noting that the musical placed greater emphasis on Lydia as a stronger protagonist. The publication stated, "This Lydia resonates with younger audiences, not because she drops hollow buzzwords, but rather because she is wholly realized as a Gen Z protagonist, clever, socially aware, reasonably nihilistic, and emotionally honest." If one was on TikTok around 2019 and the beginning of 2020, they may have been greeted with numerous videos of Gen Zers dancing and lip-syncing to some of the musical numbers, particularly Say My Name. Trends such as this one prove that Beetlejuice as an idea goes beyond any single generation and has continued to find audiences in a variety of mediums. You might assume Beetlejuice would be a natural for an October release date to play up its macabre vibes. But opening the film at the beginning of September may be an incredibly fortuitous move for its total box office haul. As Slash film box office expert Ryan Scott pointed out, it gets to hang around all the way until Halloween, giving it nearly 2 months to reasonably make its money. Scott also noted, "September is often an abandoned month by Hollywood, and the right movie can make use of that." Other than the front room, nothing else really opened alongside Beetlejuice, which was likely a smart move. It's been 36 years since people last saw the Dietz family and their demon, so fans were almost certainly itching to revisit these beloved characters. Of course, Michael Keaton is back as Beetlejuice, returning on the condition that the freelance bioexorcist wouldn't be used more than necessary. This is keeping with the original film, in which the larger-than-life ghost only has about 17 minutes of screen time. For its part, the sequel also utilizes the character judiciously, focusing more on the interpersonal relationships between 3 generations of Deet's women. Speaking of which, it's not every day people get to see Winona Ryder in a new movie. Despite being in high demand throughout the 1990s in films like Edward Scissorhands and Bram Stoker's Dracula, most people these days probably know her best as Joyce Byers on Stranger Things. Additionally, Lydia remains a beloved goth icon, and those who grew up watching her as a rebellious teenager now get the chance to see her as a mom trying to connect with her daughter.
Death is hard. Yeah, sometimes I think life is harder.
Catherine O'Hara is always welcome on our screens, and she returns as Delia Deetz. O'Hara has generated a lot of goodwill as of late, thanks to playing Moira Rose on Schitt's Creek. Some folks are missing, like Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, but there's enough of the original cast to make it worth the trip to the theater to see these iconic characters once more. Jenna Ortega has gone through a drastic transformation from Disney Channel star to certified scream queen. She's frequently listed as one of the young stars taking Hollywood by storm, with Ryan Scott saying, "Ortega ensured that this sequel wasn't purely a nostalgia play. It gave younger audience members a way in. It also certainly helped in terms of getting the movie play on social media, as well as with the press tour." Spooky projects certainly seem to be in Ortega's wheelhouse at the moment. She was a big part of the 2 most recent Scream movies, and this is her second collaboration with director Tim Burton, who spearheaded Netflix's Wednesday. Ortega is a big draw for Gen Z, as Scott stated, since she brings a level of authenticity and often uses her platform to speak out on larger social issues. It's similar to what drew Gen Z to Lydia in the Beetlejuice musical, and Ortega seems refreshingly real as opposed to creating a fake persona suitable for social media. Of course, not every movie starring Ortega has done well at the box office. Just look at Miller's Girl, a controversial erotic thriller that only recently blew up on Netflix. Beetlejuice plays into Ortega's strengths and sensibilities, so it's not particularly surprising that people wanted to see her carry on the Deet's legacy. Tim Burton has amassed legions of fans over the years. After making a name for himself throughout the 1980s and 90s, his output has decreased in recent years, with his last film being 2019's live-action Dumbo. Burton actually stated that he believed Dumbo would be his last Disney movie, saying, "I realized that I was Dumbo, that I was working in this horrible big circus, and I needed to escape." That movie is quite autobiographical at a certain level. Since then, Burton has directed 4 episodes of Netflix's Wednesday, in addition to producing the show. But it's been a while since fans have seen a proper Burton movie on the big screen. Combine that with the fact that Beetlejuice is arguably the most iconic Tim Burton character ever, and it feels like a slam dunk that gives people the opportunity to see what else a filmmaker has up his sleeve.
The juice is loose.
Audiences may be lucky they got a new Tim Burton movie at all. The director admitted to Empire that he was burnt out on making films. But Wednesday reignited his passion. He was drawn to direct Beetlejuice to his connection to Lydia. He explained, "It was a character that I understood, that I felt very strongly about. What happened to Lydia? You know, what happens to people? What happens to all of us? What's your journey from a gothic kind of weird teenager to what happens to you 35 years later?" Filmmaking technology has come a long way since 1988. When news of a new Beetlejuice movie came around, some fans wondered whether CGI would replace practical visual effects. Fortunately, those fears were alleviated when the trailer came out and showed that the same aesthetic from the first film will be implemented in the sequel. For example, the shot of the sandworm indicated that stop-motion animation would still have a role in this movie. There's undoubtedly some CGI used throughout the movie, but adhering to the same look as the first film only increases the nostalgic appeal. Burton explained to Entertainment Weekly why it had to be that way, saying, "It needed a back-to-basics handmade quality. It's re-energized why I love making movies. There's no denying that the sequel looks completely different from anything else in theaters at the moment, which could also explain why audiences are flocking to see it." Plenty of legacy sequels have come out over the past few years, and while it's one thing to follow up a beloved property, it's another thing entirely for it to actually be good. Some, like Jurassic World Dominion, made a lot of money despite poor reviews. But when a legacy sequel actually does a good job of continuing its story, it's a win for everyone. One could look at the box office success of Top Gun Maverick for how to do the concept right, and it appears the Beetlejuice sequel has achieved that same goal. Rotten Tomatoes critics overwhelmingly agree that Beetlejuice was a worthy endeavor. While some reviewers criticized the scattershot plot, it earned high marks for its nostalgia factor, and for bringing back Michael Keaton as a ghost with the most. That's probably more than enough for audiences who wanted to watch something entertaining to the point where they could overlook any flaws and just enjoy the wild ride. It's understandable why studios would be interested in legacy sequels as a concept. Nostalgia is all the rage, so if you can make a follow-up to a movie that came out 20 or 30 years ago, especially with some original cast members attached, people should flock to theaters. Again, just look at Top Gun or the Jurassic World and Scream franchises. However, 2024's legacy sequel contributions have seen more mixed results.
Legacy characters. Not quite a reboot, not quite a sequel.
Ghostbusters Frozen Empire brought back Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Ernie Hudson from the original film and ended up grossing a little over $200 million globally against a $100 million budget. It's not terrible, but isn't a standout success either. Twisters is a far more intriguing case study, as it doesn't include any original actors, instead focusing on a new crop of tornado chasers led by Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones. Despite this difference, the film has grossed well over $360 million worldwide. Of course, the film didn't accomplish this with nostalgia alone. There needs to be something else, whether it's a good story, a beloved character, or an emphasis on a certain visual style. Beetlejuice had a perfect mix of factors to make it a hit, and it's bound to make the prospect of a third Beetlejuice attractive to Warner Brothers.
Even Will Smith's infamous Oscar slap couldn't keep fans from seeing Bad Boys Ride or Die, which blew away the competition in its opening week. Here's why the action movie's box office numbers surprised everyone. This most obvious explanation for the success of Bad Boys Ride or Die is that it didn't have much competition over the weekend it was released. Excluding smaller releases like the Julia Louis-Dreyfus-led surreal drama Tuesday and Rachel Sennett's I Used to Be Funny, the only new release Ride or Die had to compete with was The Watchers. With no new challengers to hinder its breakout box office run, Ride or Die merely had to breeze past recent holdovers. Chris Pratt's inexplicable The Garfield Movie and John Krasinski's ambitious but critically underwhelming fantasy film If both target a significantly younger audience. While the first two Michael Bay films certainly always had their fans, Bad Boys was never considered a huge franchise.
Now back up, put the gun down, and give me a pack of tropical fruit bubblicious. And some Skittles.
Even as studios seemed keen on reviving or rebooting any IP with a handful of fans and stars young enough to return, it would have been hard to imagine such a simple buddy cop concept thriving. But shockingly, in the year 2020, Bad Boys was revived. Released in January of that year, Bad Boys for Life proved not only that the series had financial potential, but that it could be made better with a few stylistic revamps. It's almost as though directors Adil El Arbi and Bilal Fallah ran parallel to Bay's own growth as a director without being afraid of creating something ridiculously grand on the way. The end result injected a powerful shot into the arm of the series, netting the studio a tidy $427 million haul while becoming the series' best-reviewed entry on Rotten Tomatoes. It also created a new generation of Bad Boys ticket buyers for Bad Boys Ride or Die. All this being said about Bad Boys for Life creating more fans, we obviously can't forget the longtime fans of the series who have been following detectives Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett all the way since 1995. Though it was no critical darling, the original Bad Boys was an enjoyable popcorn flick to many and went on to become a massive financial success, raking in $141 million worldwide. For any studio executive looking to print some money, greenlighting a sequel was a no-brainer, even in spite of the uneven foundation laid by the first film. Unfortunately, Bad Boys 2 is to Bad Boys what Too Fast, Too Furious is to The Fast and the Furious, an unnecessary sequel that has more explosions and guns but way less story. Perhaps if Michael Bay had pitched sending Lowry and Burnett on a Tokyo vacation, they would have made a third film sooner. Like later films in the Fast franchise that were made after its own soft reinvention, Bad Boys Ride or Die fearlessly mines its own mythology for plot possibilities. This was clear from the first trailer alone, which revealed that Joe Pantoliano's Captain Howard would be returning once more, albeit from the grave. As happy as new fans will be, Ride or Die is appropriately a treat for the series' longtime fans as well. A popular debate among film fans today is whether or not franchise blockbusters killed the concept of movie stars. If you look at the top 100 highest-grossing lead actors right now, you'll see plenty of stars who have appeared in Marvel movies. Yet even among these familiar but far from ubiquitous names, you'll find a few exceptions: Tom Hanks, Tom Cruise, and Will Smith. However, Smith's star has been in flux, maybe more than any actor working in the 2020s. His infamous Oscar slap turned him into both a viral meme and outright villain overnight.
I apologize to you. My behavior
was unacceptable.
However, Ride or Die was an important moment for Smith's career, one that would mark his return to Hollywood and set the temperature for his future as one of America's last movie stars. The level of interest generated by this unique circumstance shouldn't be overlooked. As much as filmmakers like Martin Scorsese bemoan the average moviegoer transforming into an unadventurous consumer, the fact is that there's too much film and television out there for people to waste their time on things they won't enjoy. Fortunately for Bad Boys Ride or Die, reviews were mostly working in its favor. Though this feedback won't create the positive buzz necessary to get Ride or Die in contention for Best Picture, it will likely generate just enough to sway those on the fence in an otherwise quiet time for theaters. Many critics praised Will Smith and Martin Lawrence's charisma and comedic chemistry, as well as its inherent value as a fun, noisy summer blockbuster. As Vulture put it in their positive review, Bad Boys Ride or Die serves as passable entertainment. Ride or Die also received a grade of A- from CinemaScore. Even though all previous Bad Boys films received A grades, older conventional wisdom in Hollywood maintains that any A score is a positive indicator of box office success. As most modern blockbusters essentially continue to bring in the same audience demographics that have made them successful in the past, Bad Boys Ride or Die was able to attract the attention of a wider audience. According to demographic tracking reported on by various entertainment outlets, Ride or Die was in part successful because Black audiences showed up in full force to support it. A massive 44% of everyone that saw Ride or Die during its opening weekend identified as Black or African American, a figure that's above other high-profile movies released this year. This is especially true for the film's theatrical competitors. During its opening weekend, only 8% of the already small audience attracted by George Miller's Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, identified as Black. If performed slightly better during its own opening weekend by this metric, with Black moviegoers making up 10% of its total audience. Another demographic that showed up for Ride or Die was 18 to 34-year-olds, who made up 44% of the total opening weekend audience. Last year, fans of action movies full of explosions and muscle-bound shootouts had Fast X to look forward to. The film was meant to be the beginning of a glorious multi-part final chapter for the Fast and Furious franchise. Now, times are very different. For starters, the absence of a movie of this kind creates a programming gap that Bad Boys Ride or Die was stylistically and dramatically ready to fill. But there's also a question these days of whether or not we'll get another Fast and Furious movie at all. Star Vin Diesel once claimed that Fast X would be a trilogy, only for director Louis Leterrier to douse water on the idea when it made just $704 million worldwide after its budget ballooned to over $340 million. When it was all said and done, Fast X was only the 8th highest-grossing movie in the series. Then there's the fact that a former assistant of Diesel's is currently suing him over disturbing allegations of sexual battery. Diesel has denied these allegations and seems optimistic about the future of the franchise. Audiences are almost certainly picking up on this uncertainty and may be looking for other films and/or franchises to get emotionally invested in. In terms of tone, origin, style, and audience expectations, Bad Boys comes closest to Fast and Furious, more specifically the franchise's critical peak from Fast and Furious 6 to Furious 7. Though Bad Boys for Life fans probably associate directing team Adil and Bilal with their past two entries in the franchise, most others probably know them as the directors of HBO's scrapped Batgirl film. The buzzy project starred In the Heights breakout Leslie Grace as the main character before it was unceremoniously scrapped by the leadership at Warner Bros. Discovery in favor of a tax write-off. If that decision wasn't controversial enough, the insistence from higher-ups that the film wasn't good enough to be released drew skepticism and ire from both long-neglected DC fans and those who were simply looking forward to the movie. After the disappointing releases of The Flash, Black Adam, and Shazam! Fury of the Gods, it began to seem less likely among fans that Batgirl could have been so much worse to deserve cultural deletion. However, with all this came a significant amount of goodwill for Adil and Bilal, both of whom reacted to the situation with class and moved forward. Even Kevin Feige, Edgar Wright, and then forthcoming DC Studios co-CEO James Gunn personally reached out to them. On X, you'll find many accounts posting from their theater seats in support of Adil and Bilal and decrying WB's decision to axe Batgirl. Of course, no discussion of a film's box office success would be complete without considering its marketing. Bad Boys Ride or Die had a modest but impressive rollout, which began in earnest with the debut of its first trailer, which perfectly conveyed everything the final product was aiming to deliver to audiences.
I need nasty Mike, bad boy.
Like the film, the initial trailer for Ride or Die operated on two levels, the first being the non-stop action it promised potential audience members. Again, there's a brilliant combination of Michael Bay's modern action sensibilities and Dylan Bilal's clearly choreographed and shot combat. From the first time a gun is fired in the trailer, audiences know the franchise has once again been left in safe, skilled hands. Then there's the comedy, of which there's a surprisingly large amount throughout both Ride or Die and its trailer. At the time of the trailer's release, it seemed to some that the studio had made a choice to feature Martin Lawrence more prominently due to Will Smith's controversial cultural status. But in the final film, Lawrence actually does get a rather outsized amount of comedic material to work with, arguably to the film's benefit. If all movie trailers were as clear, stylish, and arresting as the first trailer for Ride or Die, maybe their corresponding box office numbers would look just as nice.
Released to great fanfare, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes wasn't a guaranteed hit, but it proved itself a worthy successor to the previous films. How did it manage such a feat in a difficult time for theatrical movies? Going to the movie theater can appeal to audiences at any time of the year, but spring might be the best time for moviegoers. The dreary, cold days are over, the sun is shining, and that means people are happier and eager to go out. While studios used to focus most of their attention on the summer, the past decade has shown that pushing releases up into spring resulted in some of the biggest movies of all time, as with Avengers Endgame and Furious 7, both being released in April. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes split the difference with a mid-May drop, which may have been the sweet spot. As a result, people may be feeling more excited to go to the theater. If the last 10 years have taught us anything about the state of the movie business, it's that nothing is a safer bet than a sequel to a successful film. Better still, fully fledged franchises are only getting bigger, even if there's growing concern about people getting tired of Marvel movies and other properties. Yet, even if audiences are growing bored with many film series, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes demonstrates that a franchise follow-up can sell a whole lot of tickets while impressing viewers with jaw-dropping special effects and a good story. Reviews from both critics and audiences have called out the luscious cinematography, suspenseful narrative, and lifelike CGI, which only seems to keep getting better since the previous 3 Apes movies earned back-to-back Oscar nominations for VFX. It remains to be seen if Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes could have enough momentum to strengthen the franchise even further. Franchises can be big business in theaters, and it's true that studios are increasingly reliant on them for regular revenue. But all too often it seems franchises run out of steam after a few movies, but keep pumping out lesser sequels. We've seen examples of such fourth movie slumps with the likes of the Pirates of the Caribbean and Indiana Jones franchises, and more recently the woefully disappointing Thor: Love and Thunder.
Thor, we need your help to win this battle. Let's go.
Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, by contrast, does it right, and its story provides a real motivation for the series to continue. It starts the story anew by flashing forward into the future and introducing a whole new cast of characters, both human and ape alike. The story completely alters the status quo, with apes now in firm control of the planet and humans devolving into a race of primitive, almost ape-like people, unable to fend for themselves and barely able to communicate. Ultimately, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes works to subvert the notion that a franchise can't stay fresh after 4 movies, and audiences are responding. When the franchise returned in 2011, it took Planet of the Apes back in time further than some probably expected. Rather than being set in a world where primates run the planet, it began in the present and showed how genetic experiments led to human-like apes with a desire to rebel. The 2 sequels explored the fallout of that experimentation as an ape uprising forced humanity into a decades-long war between the 2 sides. Unlike its direct predecessors, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes has a lot in common narratively with the groundbreaking original 1968 sci-fi classic, and that's surely a principal part of its appeal. For the first time, we see a world ruled by apes, who have their own society and have largely forgotten that humans were once the dominant species on the planet. Despite the popularity of the 3 previous films, and no matter how good they were, Kingdom presents a kind of story that longtime fans of the franchise have been eager to see, which may have helped bring audiences to theaters. With a central character named Nova, a human girl clearly invoking the feral woman Nova from the original film, there are more than just surface-level parallels too. A primitive ape civilization, humans living as animals, and a battle for the soul of the Planet of the Apes, fans looking to recapture the spirit of the first movie are finally getting what they always wanted.
We will name her Nova.
In 2001, director Tim Burton tried to revive the Planet of the Apes series by turning it into an action-packed science fiction roller coaster ride. That didn't quite work out well enough. So in 2011, it came back with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, a smaller-scale, character-focused drama, and it soared. That trend continued with the next two sequels, and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes ups the ante even further by focusing mainly on ape rather than human drama. The first two movies in the rebooted series focuses more heavily on the humans, with the third entry, War for the Planet of the Apes, splitting the narrative just about equally between both sides. But Kingdom puts the spotlight almost entirely on the apes themselves, with almost the entirety of the conflict played out between the ape characters, while a young woman named Nova provides the biggest human role. This helps set it apart from the previous three movies and gives audiences further insight into ape society in a world where humanity has been all but erased.
You chose humans over apes.
Because of the focus on apes, the film is able to get away with much more heavy-handed social commentary and political allegory. For some, it may be a bit too unsubtle, but because it's centered on an almost alien-like society, it works well. It's just the kind of story that today's politically motivated mass audience can latch onto. Movie studios prefer not to wait too long between their big franchise releases. Look no further than Star Wars. Since 2015, Disney has dropped a new Star Wars movie every year between 2015 and 2019, while also releasing 5 new live-action TV shows with more on the way.
Stand together. Die together.
But this desire to pump out new movies and TV shows can lead to serious franchise fatigue, and that kind of burnout can leave fans less excited to head to the movies. But Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes seems to have waited just the right amount of time to come back, with 7 years elapsing since War for the Planet of the Apes in 2017. Admittedly, some of the delay was due to factors outside of the studio's control. Disney's buyout of 20th Century Fox in 2019 slowed the development of franchises like Alien, Predator, and Avatar, among others. Whatever the reason, the 7-year wait was enough to allow moviegoers to miss the franchise, while not waiting quite so long as to make them forget about it either. Similarly, younger audiences who saw the first few movies are now old enough to view the series with a bit of nostalgia, giving it a double-edged appeal. While it's likely that the 7-year gap between War for the Planet of the Apes and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was enough to make fans miss the franchise, it's also possible that the real-world events of the past 7 years helped boost the movie. In 2019, Walt Disney Studios took control of the Planet of the Apes franchise after buying 20th Century Fox, and it was fair for fans to wonder what its new owners might do with the property. Given Disney's family-friendly nature, would sequels define the story and make it more palatable for younger viewers? Or would they give the filmmakers the same long leash and free rein to go wherever they wanted? That question was perhaps enough to get many moviegoers curious to get to theaters and see for themselves. One fan wrote on Rotten Tomatoes, "I was excited as this has been the best franchise, but also a little wary since it's the first Apes movie since Disney took over. I was pleasantly surprised how well it kept with the previous trilogy." If that sentiment is representative of the larger audience, it's no wonder the film had success. It answered the fans' questions in a positive manner, and the dollars came pouring in. Perhaps one of the biggest reasons that Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes did well on its opening weekend was the film's surprising lack of competition. That was somewhat unexpected, both because May is typically a big month for blockbusters and because the last 2 Planet of the Apes movies faced off against tentpoles like Transformers: Age of Extinction and Spider-Man: Homecoming.
You guys aren't the real Avengers. I can tell Hulk gives it away.
Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, however, had very little to contend with. Not only was it the only major movie on its opening weekend, but the previous week's default winner, The Fall Guy, tanked hard with audiences. Now that Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes has answered the question of whether it would be a hit, the next question is what this renewed success means for the Planet of the Apes franchise. For starters, it's a solid bet we'll get another sequel. While director Wes Ball is interested in coming back, don't expect him to remake the original Apes movies just yet. Ball told IndieWire that he's already got ideas about further exploring the relationship between the human Nova and the ape leader Noah. But for Ball, it's more than just continuing to tell the story of those characters. He told IndieWire, Empire. What I like about the franchise is that these movies hold up a mirror to our society, the things we're going through, and we get to look at ourselves and see humanity through these apes' eyes. With the box office success of Kingdom, along with the ambiguous ending that left plenty of story left to be told, it's a fair bet that Bull will get a chance to utilize that mirror again.
With the runaway success of its predecessors, A Quiet Place Day One had a lot to live up to. Luckily, it absolutely blew up the box office, and for good reason. A movie doesn't always fail or succeed on its own merits. There are plenty of circumstances that are far outside the control of any individual filmmaker or studio. For example, the biggest competition any one movie usually needs to worry about is another film butting in on its opening box office. On that front, A Quiet Place Day One was very fortunate. The prequel's debut wasn't going up against many other openings, much less another blockbuster summer debut. The Kevin Costner film Horizon: An American Saga Chapter 1 opened the same weekend as Day One, but the two movies appealed to wildly different audiences. Day One beat out Horizon as the second best performing movie of the weekend, losing out on the top spot to Inside Out 2, which says more about Pixar's popularity than anything. Day One couldn't have hoped for better competition on its opening weekend than a historical western and a weeks-old family movie, and it's probably for this reason it grossed $53 million in the US and $98 million worldwide. It was able to swoop in and grab both horror fans looking to head to the theater and any adult who didn't want to sit through the first 3-hour chapter of Costner's proposed 4-part film series. The marketing push for A Quiet Place Day One arguably helped the movie even more than its fortunate opening weekend competition. The initial teaser trailer for Day One was able to call back to fans of the first film with a quick shot of John Krasinski's Lee Abbott, while also reminding them of the return of Djimon Hounsou's Henri from Part 2. Between Day One trailers being blasted out on YouTube and social media, and theaters playing them ahead of almost every film, there was hardly any way to avoid hearing about the movie in the lead-up to its release. One fan even commented on Reddit that the marketing for Day One was so thorough that they were still seeing advertisements while trying to sit down for the movie itself, writing, "In my screening last night, they even played the Day One trailer before Day One. We got worried and thought we were in the wrong theater." Hey, you can't blame the marketing team for giving it 110%, and clearly all those efforts seriously paid off. Audience interest in the Quiet Place universe not really waning might be the simplest explanation behind the success of A Quiet Place Day One. It's a little hard to believe, but this franchise kicked off 6 years ago. The first A Quiet Place movie was a surprise success, but in retrospect, the appeal is easy to see. Viewers seem to love post-apocalyptic movies, and A Quiet Place had an original twist that really forced audiences to live in the silent tension the characters were experiencing. Even after delays, the sequel ended up being a box office success, and by taking us back to the beginning, Day One promised fans it would tell a side of the story they hadn't gotten to see much of before. There's still enough interest in the strange alien creatures at the heart of A Quiet Place to keep this thing kicking a while longer. Day One had the best opening in the entire franchise, and the strength of the last two movies has a lot to do with that success. A Quiet Place has become a franchise that people know they can rely on for a certain degree of quality, and that drove them back to theaters for the prequel. A Quiet Place Day One benefited from the success of the earlier two movies in the franchise, but it also made the right choice to not continue the story those movies started. Because Day One is a prequel, it really doesn't require much previous knowledge from viewers. It doesn't matter if you've never heard of A Quiet Place or if you've been with the series since its very first opening weekend, you can still sit down and enjoy Day One all the same. Since the film largely breaks away from the characters that we've seen before, established fans and total newcomers will find themselves on more or less even footing when they sit down to watch it. That's not to say it ignores everything that's come before. There are a number of small nods for longtime fans and even entire characters that are meant to appeal to people who have seen the first two films. Ultimately, however, Day One was able to bring the franchise to a new audience in a way that a movie like A Quiet Place 3 just wouldn't have been able to do. By expanding the world of A Quiet Place, there's also a good chance that the prequel could even inspire sequels of its own. Director Michael Sarnowski has even hinted that he has been thinking about how we might end up seeing some of the characters from Day One again. Odds are good that audiences would have turned out for A Quiet Place Day One no matter what, but it definitely doesn't hurt that the movie opened in 2024. Some years are big for action blockbusters, while others are packed full of dramas. 2024, however, has been a year for horror sequels. Before Day One debuted, movies like The Strangers Chapter 1 and The First Omen had already set the tone. Those were also horror prequels, though they weren't exactly on equal standing with each other. The Strangers flopped with critics and audiences alike, but The First Omen performed quite a bit better, letting audiences know that 2024 wasn't just going to be a year of disappointments. There's a chance some people were just using Day One to kick off their own horror sequel marathon. There's something to be said for fitting in, and Day One really matched the overall tone of familiar horror franchises trying new things, for better or worse. Being a prequel isn't the only way that A Quiet Place Day One shook up the franchise. The movie also introduced some big changes behind the camera, with original director and co-writer John Krasinski stepping away and letting another filmmaker take his place.
For Day One, I wanted to find a writer-director that would come up with something totally unique. And so we found Michael Sarnowski.
Krasinski's work on the series made A Quiet Place what it is, so regardless of who took over his job for Day One, fans probably would have shown up to theaters out of pure curiosity. Luckily, Day One had Michael Sarnowski sitting in the director's chair, and that arguably helped the movie bring out some moviegoers who otherwise would have had no interest in A Quiet Place. Prior to directing Day One, Sarnowski made his feature directorial debut on the Nicolas Cage movie Pig, which arrived in 2021 to massive critical acclaim. There's a big difference between an emotional drama like Pig and a blockbuster horror sequel like Day One, but that alone is cause for some interest. Reviewers seem to agree that Sarnowski once again proved that he's a capable director with Day One. There's no denying that his work on the movie helped make it a worthwhile watch, but his name alone also possibly helped get some Pig fans through the theater doors during the movie's opening weekend. In addition to Sarnowski's direction, the talent in front of the camera in A Quiet Place Day One also had quite a bit to do with the movie's success. Front and center is 12 Years a Slave and Black Panther star Lupita Nyong'o, who horror fans should also be intimately familiar with by now. Back in 2019, she starred in Little Monsters and Us, and since then she's kept busy with appearances in movies like The 355 and Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. Alongside her is Joseph Quinn, who fans will likely recognize as Eddie Munson from Stranger Things. Those two get the lion's share of the attention in Day One, but some of the side characters are played by notable actors as well. In addition to Hansu, Hereditary star Alex Wolff also appears in the film. Actors like that probably helped put Day One on the radar of people who missed the first two movies in the series, which were bolstered by the likes of Emily Blunt, John Krasinski, and Cillian Murphy. Everyone who's seen A Quiet Place Day One knows that the real star of the movie is Frodo the cat.
You can't have a cat in here. It's a service cat.
Frodo, who belongs to Nyong'o's character Samira, provides some of the most thrilling and heartwarming moments in the entire movie. According to Sarnowski, Frodo was a key part of the story from the beginning, telling The Hollywood Reporter, "Frodo grew naturally out of Sam's character. A hospice patient isn't necessarily aiming for survival during the end of the world, and this is a chance for her to reconnect with her life. Frodo became an extension of that." Frodo made such a splash that, after the movie's debut, outlets like Variety and The Wall Street Journal were shouting him out in headlines. Fans loved Frodo's on-screen action, but his behind-the-scenes story is even better. Frodo was played by two real cats, Schnitzel and Nico, and Nyong'o wasn't excited to be working with them at first. She had a phobia of cats and went through exposure therapy to be able to film with them in Day One. Happily, the therapy and Nyong'o's experience working with two cats for the movie accomplished more than anyone could have guessed. By the end of the shoot, Nyong'o had decided to adopt a cat of her own. That's reason enough to start putting a cat in every new release. If you're new to A Quiet Place, then you might find it easy to overlook just how important the setting of Day One is to the rest of the franchise. The first movie in the series took place almost entirely at a small farmhouse, and the second movie gave us brief glimpses of small-town life before and after the alien apocalypse. Day One, on the other hand, takes us to the Big Apple, which is absolutely terrifying when you stop to think about it.
No more people. No more New York.
There are millions and millions of people in the city that never sleeps, and that makes keeping the volume down an extreme challenge. Based on the premise of Day One alone, fans knew that they were in for the biggest, most extreme version of A Quiet Place yet. The setting helped build excitement for the movie leading up to its release, because we knew we were going to see some serious destruction and some real proof of why the sightless aliens were able to so easily take over the world. In the end, Day One opted to focus its attention on the smaller, more human aspects of the story, but the setting still plays an important role in the movie and its overall success at the box office. Horror prequels and sequels are a mixed bag, and we could all probably name some definite winners and losers off the top of our heads. So many follow-ups that fail to make an impact end up riding the coattails of a movie that audiences already fell in love with. There was every chance that A Quiet Place Day One gave us all the apocalyptic imagery and none of the heart of the original movie. However, the prequel arguably managed to surpass the movies that came before it. Plenty of reviewers have been completely caught off guard by the storytelling in Day One. The Hollywood Reporter's David Rooney wrote, "It's not often we get a post-apocalyptic saga that remains so personal, so in touch with human loss as something not just forgotten in the next jump scare, but given room to linger." He is far from the only one who noticed that Day One manages to perfectly hit the emotional beats and flesh out its main characters while still providing a blockbuster experience. IGN reviewer Eric Goldman had a similar view, writing, "The spin-off/prequel to those earlier films introduces new characters in a new setting that successfully elevates both the tension and the emotional impact of John Krasinski's nearly dialogue-free horror films." Goldman even went on to call the film the series' best movie to date. So it's fairly safe to say that instead of being a forgettable cash grab, Day One managed to reinvent the franchise and make A Quiet Place feel fresh again.
Is a Pixar slump over? Has everyone finally forgotten Lightyear? Here's why Inside Out 2 exceeded all expectations at the global box office. When The Fall Guy kicked off summer 2024, it enjoyed an opening weekend audience that was 54% male. Nearly half the audience may have been women, but it was still unusual for a romantic comedy to bring in more men than women. 3 weeks later, Furiosa opened in theaters everywhere. Despite having a female lead and following up a beloved classic with widespread appeal, only 28% of that movie's opening weekend was women. Debuting between the two was Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which had a 60% male audience on its opening weekend. These three titles reflect the reality that summer 2024, before Inside Out 2, was largely appealing to just dudes.
Men stop! Yeah, men stop! Men stop!
This was flipped upside down with Inside Out 2, however, as women comprised 62% of the movie's opening weekend audience. With women in the minority for other summer releases, Inside Out 2 seemed to especially resonate with a demographic woefully undeserved this season. It's also not like the surplus of female moviegoers alienated men from coming to the theater either, with 38% of its opening weekend ticket sales coming from the guys. Inside Out 2 grossed just under $60 million from male moviegoers, more than double the opening weekend of Furiosa. Pixar movies released in June have often entered a competitive marketplace for animated family fare. In 2012, for instance, Brave debuted just 2 weeks after Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted. Cars 3, meanwhile, opened in theaters 2 weeks after Captain Underpants, the first epic movie in 2017. Then there's a classic example of WALL-E premiering just 3 weeks after Kung Fu Panda skadooshed audiences everywhere in 2008. Summer is a prime spot to launch kid-friendly movies, of course, which means Pixar titles debuting in June are rarely without company. That was certainly not the case in June 2024, however. The only major animated movie released in the 3 months before Inside Out 2 was the Garfield movie. This scarcity has ensured that Inside Out 2 could fill a gap in the marketplace and feel extra special to audiences. Essentially, Inside Out 2 has enjoyed a wide-open theatrical landscape, which no doubt paved the way for its massive overperformance.
We're going!
Sequels tend to make money. That's pretty much the main reason why Hollywood makes them so often. And Pixar sequels, save for 1 or 2 notable exceptions, are pretty much foolproof at the box office. From 2010 to 2019, Pixar released 4 different sequels that each made $415 million or more domestically. Even lower-grossing follow-ups, such as Monsters University, cleared $260 million domestically. 2 of these sequels, Finding Dory and Incredibles 2, set box office records at the time of their release. These aren't the usual supersized sequel box office hauls either. Pixar follow-ups are especially sturdy financially, and Inside Out 2 has continued that trend in style. It's not hard to see why Pixar sequels get an extra big box office boost. Such franchise titles are following beloved classics, a far cry from the flash-in-the-pan hits of the studio's competition. All that goodwill inevitably makes people stoked to return to the worlds of Pixar. Meanwhile, the amount of time that it takes to make new installments in Pixar franchises makes these sequels feel more like special events. New entries don't drop on an annual or biannual basis, essentially negating any chance of Pixar fatigue and instead allowing audience anticipation to heighten. Inside Out 2 may have surpassed all pre-release expectations, but the gargantuan box office hauls of Finding Dory and Incredibles 2 should have prepared us for this outcome. Even though Pixar sequels tend to sweep the box office, that doesn't mean every follow-up from the studio breaks the bank. After all, each Cars installment made less than the last one domestically. It seems that you need a beloved original movie to score Incredibles 2 box office numbers, and Inside Out 2 certainly had that at its back. The first Inside Out garnered an A Cinema score from audiences over its opening weekend in June 2015. an indicator of the great word of mouth that propelled this title to a successful summertime box office run. After doing more than 4 times its opening weekend gross in North America, the film also went on to win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature.
I won first place!
Me too! Oh, participation award.
The pop culture accomplishments of Inside Out continued well beyond its first 12 months, too. The movie inspired academic essays, internet memes, and was later referenced in a number of TV shows and movies. It appears that the original Inside Out struck a chord with audiences well beyond its initial theatrical run, building the groundwork for Inside Out 2 to build on. One of the more intriguing statistics from the domestic opening weekend of Inside Out 2 was the fact that 36% of the movie's audience in North America was Hispanic and Latino. That demographic was the largest racial market for the film in the region, significantly outpacing Caucasian moviegoers. This impressive feat is one of many instances in recent decades of Hispanic and Latino audiences playing a key part in major box office successes. As early as 1999, blockbusters such as The Mummy reportedly exceeded expectations because they attracted more Hispanic moviegoers than expected. Back in 2013, this demographic moved the needle to the box office performance of nearly every major release that year. No wonder the Los Angeles Times ran an early June 2024 piece declaring that Black and Latino audiences could save Hollywood. Unfortunately, Hollywood has often struggled to properly respond to this reality. Representation of Latino characters in modern cinema has barely increased from years past, and studies have shown that the film industry is harming itself in the long term by repeatedly refusing to cater to such a vital demographic. This truth now looms larger than ever after Inside Out 2 left pre-release box office expectations in the dust, in part by attracting more Hispanic and Latino moviegoers than expected. It seems that this is just the latest smash hit to remind studios of the power of America's most dedicated moviegoers.
Hello, everybody!
In recent years, anxiety disorders have become more and more common among adults and children. How could they not? The world seems to have been constantly in peril in the 2020s. The COVID-19 pandemic, relentless political unrest, and other existential woes with seemingly no solution can make one feel helpless and despondent. Anxiety is difficult to grapple with, but it did at least give Inside Out 2 a deeply relatable element, which no doubt paid dividends during the movie's marketing campaign. Newbie character Anxiety instantly connected with people in the Inside Out 2 promotional materials as a physical manifestation of a sensation that so many people have dealt with. The marketing of Inside Out 2 promised, among other things, a colorful, upbeat movie that might also tackle people's bottled-up experiences with anxiety. Moviegoers might not feel so alone seeing fictional characters navigate the horrors of anxiety, but keeping things PG-rated meant it wouldn't seem too daunting for people to watch. That delicate balance between reliability and escapism made Inside Out 2 a hugely attractive movie for many moviegoers. In years to come, Inside Out 2 may receive much of the credit for reviving Pixar's box office reputation. But let's not forget the role Elemental played in paving the way for the Inside Out sequel's success. That effort was only the second Pixar title to get a traditional theatrical release after the pandemic struck in March 2020. But Elemental's disastrous opening weekend, combined with Lightyear tanking in 2022, initially suggested that Pixar might be down for the count. Tossing acclaimed titles such as Soul and Turning Red onto Disney Plus had apparently caused serious damage to the studio, and it seemed for a while it may never return to its pre-pandemic glory. But then a funny thing happened. Elemental just kept going at the box office, and going, and going. The movie demonstrated hugely impressive legs that took it to just over $54 million domestically and an impressive $484 million worldwide. Admittedly, Inside Out 2 surpassed Elemental's lifetime domestic haul after just 3 days of release, but the latter film's leggy theatrical run offered a much-needed rebound for Pixar's reputation. Its strong word of mouth reminded people that Pixar movies weren't just built for streaming, and that maybe it was worth seeing these movies in theaters after all. Elemental's astonishing box office run broke all the rules for how movies are supposed to perform in theaters, and that feat undoubtedly played a part in getting audiences excited to see Inside Out 2 on the big screen. Save for the occasional exception, the biggest summer movies in history have tended to be more upbeat releases. Furiosa, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, and even, to an extent, The Fall Guy didn't always strike the right chord for moviegoers looking for traditional summertime escapism. With that lack of upbeat new movies, the summer box office inevitably struggled.
I'm too sad to walk. Just give me a few hours.
Inside Out 2, meanwhile, was the complete opposite. Posters and trailers showcase vibrantly colorful emotions, occupying every color of the rainbow. Even more ominous emotions, such as anxiety and embarrassment, appear in hues of orange and pink. And the movie is very much a comedy too, filled with slapstick laughs, one-liners, and cheeky in-jokes. Even with the promise of that classic Pixar pathos, Inside Out 2 is promised as exactly the kind of bubbly cinema that usually flourishes at the summertime box office. Coming off a May packed full of downbeat films just made it stand out even more. On opening night, Inside Out 2 grabbed an A cinema score from audiences, reflecting the film's excellent word-of-mouth reputation. Audiences surveyed by the service post-track, meanwhile, gave the project an encouraging average rating of 4.5 out of 5 stars. This came hot on the heels of solid reviews from professional critics, indicating to audiences that this project wasn't a case of Cars 2 all over again. Instead, Inside Out 2 rode a wave of positivity that doesn't always occur for sequels. Sometimes these titles make big bucks on opening weekend, but falter after suffering average or poor word of mouth. Just look at 2023's Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. That movie had a tremendous opening weekend, but fell off a cliff afterward thanks to dismal audience reception. Inside Out 2 didn't have the same problems that sequels such as Quantumania experienced. Just look at how well it held day to day over opening weekend. After an opening day of $49 million, removing $13 million in Thursday night screenings, Inside Out 2 enjoyed an increase of roughly 4%. No sudden wave of poor audience reception caused box office numbers to crash after just one day. Instead, satisfied moviegoers kept on coming out throughout the weekend. Strong marketing and the Pixar brand may have sparked audience interest in Inside Out 2, but it was the positive buzz surrounding the sequel's artistic merits that gave the movie strong legs across its opening weekend. For the last 2 decades, the summer movie-going season has typically begun with a Marvel Studios release, the kind of reliable box office juggernaut that draws basically everybody to the local movie theater.
Avengers!
Assemble.
With no Marvel Studios title kicking off summer 2024, however, an immediate void appeared in the season's cinematic offerings. Initial releases in May 2024 bombed at the box office, as they apparently only appealed to older moviegoers. These movies couldn't function as all-ages crowd pleasers, while the few younger skewing titles on offer had little pull for the grown-ups. Summer 2024 was initially defined by titles with very narrow appeal. Inside Out 2, it turned out, was the perfect replacement for a Marvel-style hit, as the movie appealed to both younger audiences and their parents. On top of that, the qualities of the original Inside Out and a healthy dash of nostalgia also intrigued Inside Out 2 older audiences and teenagers. This wasn't just a movie for one age bracket. Anyone could go and get something out of it. People have been waiting for just that kind of movie throughout the beginning of the summer. And so, Inside Out 2 seems to have come along just when everybody needed it. No wonder then that its opening weekend shattered all expectations.